adjust it all.
Brandon is 8.2.
Well, I've usually
Nigel's
found
8.
it kind of low.
I'm the
I don't
lowest
use
at
the strips.
7.9.
I just use the strip for pH, and it's usually lower than it should be.
I don't feel like I got
The screen is red.
I don't feel like I got to.
There it is.
I really don't think I got to.
Well, I
Mike,
agree with you on that point.
Can you turn on my headphones?
What?
Number one. Yeah. Number one.
Who does number
Good
2 work
styles over
for?
there.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
I am not a number. I am a free man. I
Uh-oh.
was alone.
You're getting feedback in there.
My mind was blank.
What the?
All
One
right.
of these days. One of these
We
days.
got video, no audio.
Oh, there's all.
Dun, 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 dun. Ooh, dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. Wow, wow, wow.
We have not
We
had
were doing
The
good.
producer's
any-
back.
There we go. Go. Welcome back to Come and Brew It Radio, Mikey.
Coming to you from Texas Brewing Inc. in Haltom City, Texas. You can find us on the web at txbrewing.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and share with all your friends.
In this episode, we're starting a discussion of one of brewing's more complex topics, water profiles and adjustments. All brewers know that water is a main ingredient in brewing, but many don't know just how important water can be to your end results. It can be as simple as bad unfiltered water leading to a bad beer with an extract, or as complicated as modifying sulfate and bicarbonate additions to distilled water to make a Helles like they would in Munich while all grain brewing. Basically, water is as integral to making better beer as any other ingredient in the process. We'll start easy here with a discussion of our own local profiles, which we recently sent to Ward Laboratories Incorporated for a detailed analysis.
Before we get started, please be sure to check out our Patreon account to help support the show. Every little bit counts, and you visit patreon.com/Come and Brew It Radio. We have a variety of options for you to help keep the show going, get involved, and improve it. Plus, we'd like to thank Gabe Sassman, Chris Drake, and Brandon Grigsby for becoming patrons. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm Greg.
I'm Brandon,
I'm Stubby.
I'm Mikey B.
and welcome to Come and Brew It Radio. I'd like to point out that there's a lot of Brandons that are supporting us. This is at least the third Brandon that's supporting us on
That's
Patreon.
awesome.
Or are they all the same person?
No, we have an
Are you
army.
sure?
We are Legion. But seriously,
something.
thanks to those guys for supporting us. We really do appreciate every little bit. It makes a big difference.
Yes.
And welcome
thank
back
you.
to Come and Brew It Radio. Despite the rocky start, I think we're ready to go.
You know, what used to be really nice is when we recorded it and didn't do it live. We would just go, "Oops, we screwed up. Let's start over." And now we can't do that. So
Oh, we
We
still
used
do
to do
that.
that a lot.
Still do that.
A lot.
I think we literally just did that.
I think we maybe
Kinda
did.
sad.
And
I
last
don't know.
week-
I kind of liked Mikey's and my version of the intro song better anyway. So.
That was pretty good. Yeah.
Oh man! So anyway, welcome back, guys, and we got an interesting show for you tonight. So
Very likely interesting because this is a hard topic.
yeah, and it's something that I'll be straight up honest with you. I'm not the best at it. So
Me either. I'm real
I don't
dumb.
think anyone is absolutely fantastic.
and I think this is
Well,
you
someone
know,
has to be the best.
yeah.
There's got to
You're
be at
the
least
best.
one person.
Well, he wrote the book.
Around.
They wrote the book. That's all.
That was like Flash Gordon, wasn't it?
No, that's
No, that's
Oh, that's
Karate
Rocky.
Kid.
That's Rocky.
no, that's
Oh,
Karate Kid.
Karate Kid.
Karate
Okay.
Kid, yeah.
Well, you know that was 30-something years ago, so whatever. You know, I was sitting in the car today, and I heard a song come on, and I was like, "Man, that was like when I was a senior in high school. It was like Firehouse or something." And I was like, "Man, you know what? I think that was. Oh wow, I didn't realize I'd graduated high school 25 years ago."
25 years ago, yep.
I was
Yep.
like, oh,
Same thing happened to
man.
me the other day. Yeah. I heard somebody say, I haven't been brewing that too terribly long. I started in 98. I'm like, dude, that's almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're a bunch of old curmudgeons in here.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're gonna replace Johnny soon as the grumpy old man. You know.
I don't know. I think even if we were to try, he would come back and haunt us with his old ghost balls.
Oh, ghost balls. Nice.
He doesn't
This
listen,
just got
so I
the
can say
worst
anything I
mental
want.
picture, dude. I
Jesus.
really appreciate that. Now every time I'm going to look
Man. You're gonna be looking for his old balls.
Yeah. Oh, nasty.
Swinging
Anyway.
back and forth.
Anyway.
I'm just saying, when he's haunting your hallway, you're
Saggy.
hearing 3 steps. Is all.
Dude.
two steps in the dragging sound.
So anyway, do we have any recent happenings
Wow.
other than
Well, I think you wanted to recap a subject that kind of got off the rails on the last episode, if I remember correctly.
well, there was just one little point that I wanted to make. I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to do that, but
What do you think? This is your show or something?
Well, no, I just we weren't able to agree to disagree, and I just wanted to make a point that about barrels in general. When you're doing bourbon barrels, well, the whole reason that breweries use them for the most part is to get bourbon flavor. Well, guess what? If you're actually putting beer into a barrel and you get bourbon flavor, the actual alcohol that they're putting in there is stripping the oak flavor out of it. So you're really not getting a whole lot of oak flavor to begin with. And I think what he was trying to say is that, well, it doesn't make any sense if you're going to put bourbon back into a barrel. And I'm like, well, yeah, it does, because you're getting the bourbon flavor.
Well, I think the overall point of the whole thing, talking about the barrels and aging things in them, and the difference between doing it in a barrel and maybe just throwing some oak cubes in or something, is that there's a lot more to the barrel than just the wood flavor or whatever that's coming out of it.
100% correct.
There's the oxygen uptake, and like he was talking about, the ingress and egress of the beer in and out of the pores of the wood as heat and humidity changes. So the statement that you might as well just pour whiskey into your beer, I don't think is completely true.
It's not the same.
A barrel does become neutral at some point, but it all depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think what I look at it from the standpoint of as a small home brewer, how are you going to utilize that barrel?
Right.
And I mean, for me, I was very successful doing just pouring bourbon in it and letting it sit for 4 or 5 times. And then what I did is I funked it up, made it a sour barrel, and I made some really good, Flanders Reds with it. And then after that, about the 3rd time after doing it funky, it just didn't taste very good anymore. And if you read a lot of the guys on the Milk the Funk, they were really bash on small barrels. They don't think that they make very good sour beer. So
the exception to that being, man, you remember that Flanders Red that you made?
Yeah,
and
it was fantastic.
We inoculated that barrel, and you did all of the fermentation in the barrel, if I remember right. It went straight into the barrel.
I think I fermented in a bucket for a week or something, and then dumped it in there. But
man, that was really nice beer.
Yeah, even the second time I did it, it turned out really nice. So, but that's some of the things that you get from a barrel that you're not going to get from a carboy,
right?
Because. When you're doing the Flanders beers, you're going to get some of that oxygen uptake that we were talking about. That Brett actually produces a little acetic acid, which is acceptable in that particular style. You don't want it to taste like fish and chips, but with some malt vinegar on it. But just a hint of it, I think, actually adds to the complexity of that beer. So
needs to be there.
Those are all different points, but I just felt like I kind of needed to go back and touch on that subject just a hint, but to kind of clarify what I was trying to accomplish there.
Well, it's like we said too. Barrels are kind of hard for homebrewers anyway. It's a lot of work. It's fun. It's great fun. It's a lot of work.
And I think you really should. I would say this, that my first beer that I'm always poured out of those are the best ones.
Right.
And I think that they kind of digress from there, but.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. Yeah,
but that's not to say that you can't still get fantastic beer the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th time.
It all depends on what you want out of it. Is the thing. Mm-hmm. You have to know what to expect. Personally, I really feel like if you want to get into wood aging beer, don't start with a barrel.
Right.
Well, and exactly, and I think and that's kind of the point I was trying to make. Now, if I want a wood aged beer, I would never put it in a bourbon barrel. I mean,
it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. You're not getting oak character
unless you had a brand new barrel.
You're getting oak character. I mean, you're also getting other things.
Yeah, you're
too.
getting it from the bourbon, though. I think a lot of the point.
And the small barrels, it's very tough because it happens so quickly. The amount of surface area to the amount of liquid that's in there is so different than what professional brewers are working with. You've got to really be on top of
what's
it.
really interesting, I don't know what Balcones is really one of the few, distilleries that do use the little 5-gallon barrels. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would be willing to bet you money that they're using other size barrels besides those 5-gallon barrels. And the only reason I say that is probably because I don't know this I have no idea, but I'm just guessing that they may use some other larger barrels and blending it back.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And the reason I would do that is to speed up the process.
Well, and they're doing rum too, right? Aren't those rum barrels?
They're
No,
bourbon.
no,
They are bourbon.
Yeah.
They do rum as well.
And
too.
if you
That's what I always heard them for was rum.
if you look on the barrel specifically, like if you've bought one of the barrels from us, on the back end cap, it's going to say BC or malt. So the BC is a blue corn barrel, so it only
That's
had
bourbon too, though.
right. And the other one says malt, and it's a single malt. So they do two different batches that they're using those barrels for.
Yeah, but those are both, all the ones that we had were bourbon.
They smelled like it when I pulled a stopper.
They were
out
all
and smelled
bourbon.
It,
They
did
were
smell
just
like it.
they were probably two different blends of bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, so on to other stuff, I guess.
Yeah, we're going to tackle the beast, and I honestly, I think we got to preface this discussion a little bit by saying that we've waited to do this subject for a long time because none of us are comfortable with it because we really don't fully have an understanding, or for me, even partially have an understanding of this subject. So
there's the general basics, I think, that we all
Right.
understand, but there's a lot of us haven't really done a lot of efforts and all the different styles and doing a whole bunch of different adjustments. you know?
Well, and here's the thing that I think why we haven't got into that, and as much as us homebrewers in this area, is because we have fantastic freaking water. Now, if we had really hard water or acidic or basic water, we probably get a lot more into adjusting our water more so than what we would if we didn't live here. So,
yeah, but I think what we're going to get into also here as we talk about this more, and in the second half, we're going to talk about our specific water profiles and that kind of thing and what to do. While we do have great water to work with, when I look at my water profile and I put it into Beersmith and it told me what it was, I can understand now why I get better results with some beers than I do with others. And I think
Definitely.
that's what we want to get into here is kind of understanding if you've reached a point where you feel like you've really got the fundamentals of brewing down, you've got your fermentation down, you've got your hot side stuff down, you have a good understanding of ingredients and what they do and how to work with them and that kind of thing, and you're wanting to go to the next level, that water is a good place to start, and you don't need to have a scientific understanding of it. You can use the tools that you have out there to help you dip your toe in and get started like we've done now. So all of us sitting at the table right now, that's where we're at. We're dipping our toe in the water.
yeah,
so to
and
speak.
I've always I grew up and my dad for my whole life growing up was he's a chemist and he did water treatment for a living, so I kind of had a background a little bit in that, but man, I got to tell you, it's a whole new world when you actually go in there and you start throwing the chemistry into the beer, and how it reacts and how it changes beer. And the one thing I would say that for you guys out there, I wouldn't say if you're thinking about doing water adjustments, I think that would be the last thing I would do to try to improve the quality of my beer.
Yeah.
Unless you just have really terrible
Horrible
water to work with. Because I think well, I'll just tell you this from my experience when I've tried to make adjustments, I've more often screwed up than I've made better. And that may be because I don't have a full understanding of my water profile or what I'm using. So I have to be really careful. I don't want to misguide you guys, but at the same time, there's been a lot of times that I've failed miserably at this. So
yeah, and I think that if you do have horrible water, or there's some people out in the country out here that have well water and it's like liquid rocks, and it's just tough to use or
Not
whatever.
good for brewing.
well, they got
if you feel
crazy
like,
water or whatever.
if you have to make water adjustments in order to brew, I think your best starting point for that is to go with completely stripped down water, RO water or distilled water, something like that,
or even spring drinking water,
or spring water, and let a program tell you how to build it from scratch.
Right.
Because that's what I have found is an easy thing to do. Looking at what your water is and figuring out how to change it, that's where it gets really complicated.
And we'll say tonight, most of what we have here is focused on Beersmith, the Beersmith side of things. Because, I mean, most of us use that here. And I found, like, to be honest, don't be afraid of jumping into the pH adjustment and the water profile tools in Beersmith, because it's not as hard as it looks. You know what I mean? It's like Beersmith's kind of complicated at times especially when you're first starting. But don't be afraid of it. You know, it comes fast.
I did my first water adjustments this last weekend when I brewed, and while Beersmith made me feel comfortable getting started, it also, you still kind of have to have an understanding of what's going on. There was one thing Beersmith was telling me to do, and when we get into the specifics here, I'll touch on it, that I decided not to do because of a couple things I do know about my water. So when you do that, you still kind of have to have a basic understanding, and that's what we're going to do right now. Is we're going to skip the stone off the surface. We're going to talk about the different minerals and salts and that kind of thing that are in your water, and just a basic overview of what they do, and then kind of apply that to what our water profiles were and what Beersmith is telling us to do to make changes to get started. But I feel like it's one of these things that you really have to get into and do a lot of times to really understand it, and you're probably going to make some mistakes.
Yeah, it would be batch after batch, just working with your specific profile when you have it down, and then trying every different adjustment. I mean, you need to make the same beer several times and make sure you're actually doing it right. Hey, I can see the difference
and I think
here,
I think that was kind of the point I was trying to hit on earlier, Greg, is, you know, if you're doing a different beer every time and you go, oh, well, I'm going to try this water addition this time, I think that might be a mistake.
Right.
Whereas,
it is.
Whereas, okay, I've got a really fantastic recipe. I've brewed this beer multiple times, but it's not quite there where I want it
That's
to be.
a really good point. Yeah.
Let's tweak it now, and let's
That's
maybe work with the water.
The great beer to amazing beer argument. You know, like
Yeah,
I've got
exactly.
a great beer and I'm going to make it even better. Yeah.
And for the longest time, people come in the shop and say, you know, hey, do you make any water adjustments? You know, should I make water adjustments? And what I've always been told for the longest time was, do you like the way your water tastes at home? You know, does it taste good? Use it. If it doesn't taste good, then maybe you should look into doing your adjustments,
or starting with
or start with
bottled
water.
Right,
You know, oh, I live on well water. Oh, well, your best bet's going to be go get some bottled water.
Yeah, especially if, and that's just the water in general, is the things that you're going to taste in. Well, excuse me, that Perry is really good.
Yeah, we're drinking Samuel Smith's organic Perry here, and really good. I'm enjoying it.
It's like stupid good.
Yeah. And but anyhow, you're exactly right, Mikey, in the fact that you're going to taste the things that you like. If you don't like to drink your tap water, for all intents and purposes, don't use it for drinking, because you're going to be able to taste those exact same elements in your beer that you don't like in your tap water. So I think that right there is a really good point that I try to make quite often.
Yeah, and that kind of just goes to the overall usability of your water, not necessarily, well, this doesn't taste good, I should probably make an adjustment to it. You know,
that's the wrong kind of thinking.
Right.
And
you know, a basic adjustment I've done in the past too is just diluting your water with I think I used distilled water. Yeah, just because I knew I was doing a lager and lagers,
which is going to be a part of
better with soft water.
In the end result, whenever you get going with this, you're going to find you will have to dilute your own water if you want to meet certain profiles, that are out there.
You know, I'm going to start from very basic, the hard water versus soft water. If you don't know, hard water just means it's got lots of minerals in it.
Yes.
Soft water really just means the only mineral it has, or the only thing it has in it is going to be sodium. Mm-hmm. So softer water is pretty well stripped down.
Right.
And if you want to know if you've got hard water or soft water, if you feel like you can't wash the shampoo out of your hair in the shower, that's soft water.
Right.
If the shampoo washes right out, that's hard water.
And
that's
then your hair turns red, and your skin turns red from iron. Yeah, that's hard water. Yeah. That's country hard water anyway.
Yeah, but really, if you Google your city's water profile, if you live in a populated area, you should be able to get a basic water profile. It'll tell you. It'll give you an idea.
And you can get every major city that runs its own water department. It's going to give you a water analysis. It's going to be once a year.
What's up, Sean?
So you're going to get a once a year water analysis. You're not going to get it
Right.
as often as you would
And it's
want.
going to be trailing. Like, I think the 2016 just came out recently for this area.
And honestly, we looked at some of the water profiles from water reports, and they're going to give you the range. So they test the water multiple times through the year, and they're going to tell you, will the sodium range from this number to this number. So
when I looked at mine compared to what we got back, and I think we might be skipping ahead a little bit here.
I think we are.
right.
It was pretty close. I'll say that.
Okay.
It was workable.
And I think back to where we're going in basics wise is that, one of the things that I said, earlier that I really don't make adjustments, but where I do make adjustments is for my mash pH.
Yes,
So
me too. And I've started doing that in the last year or so.
And so, in one of the reasons that I noticed that is I was having some issue with my light colored beers, and I was having bad efficiencies with those. And what
Yeah,
I
me
realized
too.
was that, guess what? My mash is not quite acidic because we don't have the right compounds in our water here. We have pretty soft water here, so. So now what I have to do is I add some lactic acid in order to bump my pH up, and my efficiency tastes better. My overall grain tastes better.
Yeah, that's the same thing with me. I was having efficiency issues. Years ago, I had got a pH meter. I sell pH meters, so I got one sent in as a sample, and I checked my water a few times, and it was always right. So I thought, well, I don't need to do this anymore, and I never did. And I was having efficiency issues, and I thought, maybe I should go back and check the pH thing. And this time when I did, it was far off. So the ideal range for pH at mash temperatures is between 5.2 and 5.5. And that's an important distinction, is that temperature will play a part in your pH reading.
Right.
So when you're talking about at about 150 degrees, you're looking for between 5.2 and 5.5.
And the thing that the other thing about that is that your lighter malts are not going to contribute much to the acidity.
Right.
But the
And
darker
that's
malt-
one of the things Stubby
Right.
said he noticed his
Yeah.
lighter beers, and it was the same thing for me. I got better efficiency when I was brewing a porter or a stout or something like that, because your highly kilned malts, your darker ones, have acidity to them, and they
Significant
actually
amount,
acidify your mash.
Well, and as a matter of fact, it may be just because where I live out in south of town or whatever, but some of the darker beers I'll actually have to adjust down. It's too acidic, and I think that may be part of the reason I was really struggling when I was brewing at
What's that,
home
Matt?
was with dark beers more so than I was light beers, and I was really getting out. And we may cover that in my water report. Of course, it's been 8 years since I brewed at home, but I was really struggling with dark color beers where I was really successful in brewing some other styles. So we can talk about that here in a little bit too. So maybe we can cover adding. Basically what additives that we need to use to change our mash pH.
So one thing that's over the counter that you can buy, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how well this works. I've never used it. I've not talked to anybody who's used it who actually measured their pH beforehand and then measured it after they used it and kept track of it. But there is a product that's sold over the counter. We have it here. It's it's made by 5 Star, right? The same ones that make Star San, and it's just called 5.2, isn't it?
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and it's basically a buffer. So a buffer is something that can stop things that acidify or make your mash more alkaline from having as much effect is what it comes down to. And this is just it looks like a small thing of
Looks like
of
PBW.
PBW,
Yeah.
and you add some into your mash, and it's supposed to stabilize it at 5.2.
tablespoon, I believe.
Yeah.
And it comes with a scoop, I believe.
Yeah.
As well.
I don't know much at all about what situations this works in and what it doesn't and how well it works. I'm sure it works very, very well in some situations, and I would imagine there's others where it's not quite as effective. But that's a simple.
Dwayne Hudson's asking, are you using pH with strips? Are you testing pH with strips or what? Most of us here that are testing with our pH are using a pH meter.
pH strips are not very reliable.
The brewing in the ones that we sell in the shop that are geared towards home brewing, they're They're not that bad. They're pretty close to
They're
what
just
you
they're
get with
not
a
as
meter.
accurate as using a meter though.
Yeah, the
They're
meter's going to be
just not.
spot
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Strips are pretty
If you're
close.
colorblind, you're screwed, though.
Yeah, and the thing about a meter though is that you have to maintain it correctly. So at the end of a pH meter is a little bulb that's what takes the readings. And when you're storing that and you're not using it, that bulb has to always be wet. It can't ever dry out. So there's a little cap that fits on the end, and there's a solution that you soak it in. And if that ever dries out, your pH meter is ruined.
You have to get a new probe.
Yeah, you have to get a new probe for it. The other thing is you have to have a solution that lets you calibrate your pH meter too, and they're available in different ranges. You can calibrate it to 4, you can calibrate it to 7, whatever you want. So a pH meter does take some work and some understanding and some
They're a
maintenance.
pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's so, but if you really want to get the most accurate reading and understand it, that's the best way to do it. You can get a pH meter from $15, and you can spend $500 on a pH meter. Probably thousands of dollars if you want.
Right. And you know what's funny is my old man, I asked him, I was like, hey, man, you give me a pH meter? And because he'd done that for years, and he comes up and he goes, oh, yeah, I found this one, but you're going to have to, you can have this one, but you're going to need to buy a new probe for it. And I looked up the probes, and they're like $350 each.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't think I need one quite that scientific, But one of the things I will say about my experience with pH anyway is that once you kind of brew with it and you get an idea of how you need to adjust your water,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to change quite enough to me.
I agree. Yeah.
That okay, well, I know when I'm brewing light beers with not a lot of dark malts, I put 2 capfuls of lactic acid in there and I'm good to go.
And that's where I'm at too. I don't even measure out my lactic acid when I make my adjustment. I don't even put a capful. I just pour some.
I know that it's about
Yeah.
a tablespoon is what I require now. So I just as soon as I dough in, I pour a tablespoon and
Now
mix it in.
that's a tool that Beersmith has in it too. It's a recent addition in the last
Right.
year or so.
It's a good tool.
But you're going to need to know some information to tell the program for it to be accurate. So know that you're going to have to be able to take some readings, the pH of your water, and that kind of thing. So that is in there, but
It's on the mash
I
tab.
agree with Stubby. Once you figure it out, it doesn't seem to change, and you can just kind of shoot from the hip a little bit.
Yeah,
It's
and
what I do.
maybe we need to dumb it down even a little more and just explain to people what pH is. I mean, what do the numbers mean? What is 7? What is 5?
It's
what
the
is,
hydrogen ion in the water.
Well, I don't even think we need to go that far. I mean,
we wanna go
Alkalinity.
alkalinity and acidity.
Acidity. Yeah. Alkalinity is the higher number, the 7 up to 7-ish and above, whatever. That's the bases. I mean, that's where your chalk and everything is leaning you in that direction. Whereas, like, the opposite direction is going to be your acidity. That's why you'd be using the lactic acid and whatnot.
So being at 5.2 to 5.5, that is an acidic measurement, and your malt needs to be acidic, or your mash, I'm sorry, needs to be acidic. It needs to be in that range in order for the enzymes to work more effectively.
Right.
They'll work outside of that range, but just like Stubby was saying, I was noticing efficiency problems so they just are not as effective outside of that range, and that's why you need to get them.
I recently read something that Drew and Denny were talking about on some of the myths of beer brewing, and one of the things that they said that one of the biggest myths was, if you get your water over 170 when you're sparging, that you can extract tannins. Well, they basically said yes and no.
Right.
And
Right.
basically they said if your pH is not correct, if you're not in that range, and you sparge too hot, the way you could screw your beer up. It's not quite as so if you have your pH in there, you're not quite as susceptible to
Yeah.
to
So
screw up
and that's
your
what I get from that is that's the other benefit to making sure your pH is right, is that you lessen the risk of other things that you can do to harm your
the
beer.
pH is all about keeping the beer more balanced. Like the concept, efficiency is improved, the flavor fermentability results are improved. Everything that you get out of a proper pH range for your grains is leading to the better end product. Everything that's outside of that balance is leading to some sort of problem that's going to turn out one way or another, probably against what you wanted as an end result. You know,
the other thing to keep in mind too, we don't want to skip over this. If you don't want to mess around with lactic acid or phosphoric acid or anything like that to adjust your mash pH, the other way to do it is acidulated malt. And that's a really easy one because you can kind of just figure out for every 5 gallons, maybe I need a half pound of acidulated malt. That's the purpose of acidulated malt, is to adjust mash pH.
Yeah, basically it had to do with the Reinheitsgebot, so they weren't allowed to add acid to their beer. So they, in order to adjust their pH, that's the way they did that.
That's
I
generally
was
just
reading
Pilsner malt that's been acidulated with lactic acid.
Right.
So,
And I was reading, I was trying to research a recipe that Nigel and I are kind of trying to come up with to replicate that Adnam's broadside. And everybody that talks about it on the internet is talking about, well, I'm going to use acidulated malt this time because that's what they use. And I keep thinking, man, you know, don't do that. They're not putting that in there for the flavor. They're just adjusting their mash pH is all they're doing.
If your water's not the same, it doesn't
horrible
make
London water they've got. Yeah. So
that is a serious water profile.
We can get
When we
into
get to that
we'll
point,
talk
that's-
about it in a little bit.
Yeah.
What, you in the Thames Valley stuff?
Yeah.
Wow.
or
Yeah.
Burton on Trent.
Burton water.
It's
Yeah.
amazing they
So-
can make beer.
Let's attempt now to get beyond pH and into actual minerals and what's in there and what do they do.
Yes, that's
The part we're all afraid of. And please, anybody that's listening, if we make any mistakes, we welcome you chiming in on Facebook Live or sending us an email or whatever, and let us know. Like we say, we're all kind of learning this as we go. We've had all these water results and everything for quite a while now, and it's just been us kind of trying to prepare to talk about this. So we're going to kind of glean some information. What Mikey has spent a lot of time reading some of Palmer's stuff and that kind of thing to try and distill this down to a basic explanation, because that's the thing that I've found when I've tried to start looking at water before is that it immediately gets super technical.
It's because of the chemistry.
And,
Yeah,
I have no head for chemistry or any of that stuff.
well. What we want to do right now for the remainder of the first half is we're just going to talk about 6 of the
core.
the core.
That has the
chemicals.
most effect on your beer.
Right. These are the 6 items. We're gonna tell you a little bit about them, what they do, how they contribute to the overall big picture of the beer, and then afterwards we will come back and we'll talk more about specific water and water testing.
And I
all
think
that.
this you can make this as complicated as you want or as simplified. But I'll tell you, I read. I was reading John Palmer's book, and is it Palmer and Zanishev?
Palmer and Zanishev wrote it. Yeah, just the water book.
The water.
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, it is really intense, and I mean, like it's getting into organic chemistry, and I had organic chemistry in college, and I swear to God, the only reason I got a D is because me and a buddy of mine got really drunk before the exam, and somehow or another I passed. So.
You achieved the proper chemical balance.
Yes,
That's
I
what
did.
happened. Yeah, your organic chemistry.
Just
kicked
right.
in.
That was just
Yeah.
correct.
you adjusted appropriately.
But anyhow, I thought I'd failed, so we were like, screw it, let's just go get drunk.
And the typical college try.
Yeah. Sean's telling us the Easy Water spreadsheet is a really good way to calculate your additions, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah, we'll
second
get
half.
into that because I have looked at that and plugged it in. It's a little bit different than Beersmith, so we'll talk about the differences in that coming up too. So the first one we'll talk about is calcium.
calcium.
Makes your teeth strong, right?
Yes.
And your bones.
So it's instrumental yeast. It's I'm gotta
Well,
get this
the
adjusted where I
more
can-
calcium you have, the harder the water is, basically, too.
Right.
I got to get this where I can read it.
Principal ion. They're all called. It's the ions in the water. Let's see.
But calcium, it has to do with protein reactions, yeast, and enzymes, both in the mash and in the boil. It promotes clarity, flavor, and stability in the finished beer. And calcium additions may be necessary to assure sufficient enzyme activity for some mashes in water that's low in calcium.
So what
Which is a big deal for
should
them.
we get into the what you add, should we just talk about the elements in general right now?
We're going to talk about them in general right now when we
Okay.
get into our specific water profiles in the second half.
Well, I
We're
was
gonna
just
talk
saying,
about
if
what
you
add.
wanted more calcium, what would you add? Do we want to get into that now, or we want to get into that later?
I think we'll get into that later. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When
Yeah,
we talk about our
there's multiple
specific
ways
water
to do-
profiles.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you match the calcium with bicarbonates to get the temporary hardness of the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the total, but the temporary.
And that's going to get changed by your boiling. So
Right.
that's why we call it temporary.
And the range for calcium is going to be between 50 and 150 parts per million is what you're going to want for brewing water.
But you'll see that on any water report. It's pretty much measured in all parts
Right.
per million. So
Right. All of these that we're going to talk about right now, if you poll your local water report, there will be a section that will show how much of every one of these is in there. Some of these will be called different things than maybe what's shown in some software or some brewing sheets or something like that. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into plugging in the numbers.
Yeah. So what's next?
The next one would be magnesium. The proper range for brewing for magnesium is between 10 and 30 parts per million.
And if you get above 125, it's a laxative. Just so you know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
Are you
milk of
speaking from
magnesium?
personal experience?
Sure.
And then what
Sure.
milk of magnesia?
Pretty
is
much.
just like,
Yeah. It's
just makes you poop.
Yeah.
Kind
Pretty
of like
much.
coffee. Oh,
So it's going to contribute to the water hardness. It's an important yeast nutrient in smaller amounts, and that's in the 10 to 20 parts per million. Over the 50 parts per million, you're going to get more of a sour, bitter taste in the beer.
but
it is
diuretic and laxative.
Yeah.
But
And
it is
above
an
that,
important
yes.
yeast nutrient, and that's something important to note. That if you have your water report and you see that the magnesium levels are low,
So is that the reason you get beer shits?
That would be the beer shits. I don't know.
so when my wife
I
is
drink a lot of
bitching
beer
at
with
me,
some
I-
magnesium last night.
Yeah, listen, babe, I had way too much magnesium last night. Leave me alone. It's not my fault. It's the magnesium.
Hang on. Let me
That's it.
Will
question.
Allward, my local homebrew store, told me citric acid to do my water acidification instead of lactic acid. I use Brew and water to calculate my minerals and acid. I haven't noticed any off flavors from using citric acid. Basically, you're just looking for an acid.
Yeah,
To
the
lower.
pH of the acid to take it down.
Yeah, the thing is that you want to use something that you can use in high enough levels to change your pH without contributing taste or flavor. And so lactic acid has a flavor to it too. And if you were to use too much of it,
Yeah, for sure.
you
Right.
wouldn't like that. And that's why you could use phosphoric acid. I use lactic acid because I don't have to use very much of it. Generally, lactic acid
Yeah.
is like an 85% concentration. Phosphoric acid is what, like 15% or something like that. And when I've plugged it into calculators, I just had to use a lot more phosphoric acid. So I like the lactic because I can just do a little dose of
Yeah.
it. And if the citric acid is working for you and you're not getting a bad
It
flavor
seemed
from
like
it,
it depends on. I imagine it depends on where he's at too. Because if he only has to use a small amount,
Right.
it's probably not that big a deal.
He said
but-
he's using distilled water. He said, is there a reason to use lactic acid versus citric acid? And I think it would just be the acid concentration.
Right.
So,
and I think if you add it, if you use too much citric acid, it could have an effect on the flavor for
oh,
sure.
it absolutely could. Yeah, citric acid is a very strong flavor, but lactic acid
Like
is
the
too.
lactic.
Mhm.
I think one of the advantages to citric acid is it might be a little easier to handle because it's powdered instead of liquid,
Right.
and that now you'd have to make sure that it dissolved real quickly. Personally, I would like a liquid better. It may be more difficult to handle. The bottles leak and it's just kind of messy and that kind of thing. But once you put it in and stir it up, it's mixed in. You don't have to worry about it
Right.
dissolving into the water. So that's personally why I would go with lactic. But if you're using it and it's working and you're not getting any negative effects from it, then
Right.
go
and,
for it.
and exactly. And I tell people this a lot of times. Now, the way I do things and the way you may do things may be two different things. But as long as you're getting to the result that you like, I can't say that you're doing it wrong. But if you are having some problems and it's not working out for you, maybe try it a different way.
Right.
You know?
And that's something you'll find on a homebrew level. That's something you'll find on a pro level. And everything in between is that everybody's situation is different. Everybody's system is different. The resources everybody has different. So it's being done different ways in all different places for any number of reasons. The result is what matters. So, use what works and if it doesn't
I'd
work,
like to
try something
research
different.
that a little more though on the citric acid because I've never heard of somebody using that for
No,
water.
I hadn't either.
Water. I mean, I'm sure it would work, but I mean, I'm just saying I've never heard anybody using for that. So
It seems to me it would be kind of hard to compare because you're not talking about a concentration. It's 100% citric acid because it's powdered form. I don't know if there's a substrate that it's in where, with the liquids, there's going to be a concentration level because it's, mixed in with water or something like that.
Right.
So that would be hard to compare, I would think.
I would think so too. The next mineral is, of course, sodium. This is basically salt.
Yeah, and the first two that we talked about there were water hardeners. Sodium is a water softener. If you look at a water softening system, they're generally going to strip out minerals and they're going to add sodium in.
Is it a negative or a positive ion? I don't remember.
You just exceeded my knowledge. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the reason because what it does is it attaches itself to hard water ions and precipitates out. If I'm not mistaken. So I couldn't tell you the charge or whatever, but I know I think it may be negatively charged. It's been so long since I had organic chemistry, I don't think I could tell you.
Yeah, I have no idea. And to be honest, if I did know, I don't even know if that I would understand what that means. So the important thing with the sodium is the level that it's in there. So if you have a water softener or if your city has soft water, you need to be aware of the level that it's in there because if you get above 200 parts per million, you're going to taste it in your beer.
You'll actually taste the salt.
Yeah.
Quite.
And so the appropriate level is between 0 and 150 parts per million, 70 to 150. So the upper half of the range will round out the beer and accentuate the malt sweetness. So if you have a lot of sodium in your water, chances are that's contributing to
Yes, that's true.
That may be why. I should tell my doctor about that. I'm drinking a lot of sodium rich beer.
Sean Mason's sodium is negative.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
I was thinking.
I was
negative.
trying to
just
remember
couldn't
it. Thank you, Sean.
That's why I don't hang around sodium too often. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life.
Exactly.
So, but that's one of them that you need to be aware. Even if you're not planning on making water adjustments, you need to be aware of the sodium levels in your water for a couple different reasons there. And if you're making a lot of malty beers and those come out better than your hoppy beers, there's a good chance that
you probably have.
And if the hoppy
concentration of
beers are coming
sodium
out
in there,
too bitter, that could be a reason right there.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be interesting
harshly
though. If you're doing gozes and stuff, would that affect?
It should affect it, I would think. If
If
you've
you're
already got a
adding-
lot of
well,
sodium.
I guess
that
you're adding
salt's
it
put
in
in
the
at the end
boil,
of the
so
boil,
yeah,
yeah.
so it wouldn't affect it. Never mind.
I don't know if it would have much effect on yeast health. I don't
No.
know.
Well, but if
Possibly.
you already got a lot of sodium in there,
Get yeast
to
with
begin
high blood pressure.
right?
High osmotic pressure.
Really stressed out yeast.
Right.
They just burst. And
It's bound to have some effect, some stressor on the yeast.
I'm sure. We'll see.
well, it probably messes with osmosis.
Osmosis.
I was gonna say,
Because if
osmolality.
it's really salty, it would draw the water out of the cell. You would think, but I don't know. I don't know enough about yeast to really get in that. We should have had a
We need Nick.
nickel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea.
So the next thing would be sulfates, and sulfates are something that you hear a lot about when you hear people talk about brewing hoppy beers
Or wine.
Or wine.
and wine. Right, those are different type of sulfates that they add in to
That's a
kill off
preser-
wild yeast
yeah,
and you act as a preservative.
Yeah, it's a preservative for the wine side.
Potassium metabisulfate
Right.
Right.
or something.
or something, yeah. So the brewing range for normal beers is between 50 and 150 parts per million. For normally bitter beers, if you want very bitter beers, you're going to be in the 150 to 350 parts per million for very bitter beers. That's a really wide range there.
And when you say
it's
very
pretty
bitter,
big.
they do mean very bitter.
Yeah.
Like you're really pushing it out kind of beyond the boundaries. Like I think that's the thing usually we see profiles, very bitter. You're really asking for it with that one. You just want bitter
unpleasant.
more of an unpleasant bitterness. It's tongue buckling.
Harsh.
And they say at 400 plus, it's astringent and definitely unpleasant.
And at 750 parts per million, it can cause diarrhea.
Causes the diarrhea.
Lady beer shits again.
Yeah.
So if you get the sulfates and the magnesium real high up in there,
So if you're putting
don't
a
make
lot
any
of,
plans for the weekend.
If you put a lot of mag sulfate in your beer, don't make plans.
That's what milk and magnesia is.
Yes,
magnesium
it is.
sulfate.
It is.
That's right.
That's correct.
All right, so the next one would be chloride. The brewing range on that is between 0 and 250 parts per million. It says here the chloride ion also accentuates the flavor and fullness of the beer. Concentrations above 300 parts per million from heavily chlorinated water or residual bleach sanitizer
Don't use bleach for
can lead to
sanitizer.
medicine-y flavors due to chlorophenol compounds. Yeah, and I don't know. Are there still people out there using bleach?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I've got it in competition, and dude, it literally tastes like the yeast. Isn't that correct? The yeast produce chlorophenols. Isn't that right? With the bleach or something like that. But anyway,
Yeah, chlorophenols. That's
yeah,
what it says.
So it tastes like nasty. I mean, what you would expect, like hot tub water.
It's like- it
it's
just-
like
Like
in your
chlorine,
face. Yeah, in your
Drinking
face.
hot tub water, the best. Human
Yeah.
soup.
Human soup.
Human
yeah.
soup. Gross.
And it might be a little salty in there. I'm just saying.
Little,
Just gross.
a lot of sodium in there too,
Man,
and some sulfates.
things I didn't want to think
And if
about
I drink a
tonight.
bunch of beer, a lot of other stuff too, right?
A lot of urea.
All right,
so don't brew with hot tub water.
Well, I'm gonna
Somebody's
have to write,
gonna do that
I'm gonna have
now.
to write that one
Yeah,
down.
make sure you write that one down, Brandon.
So the next one would be bicarbonate. The brewing range for bicarbonates is 0 to 50 parts per million for pale base malt only beers, so your smash beers. 50 to 150 parts per million for amber colored or toasted malt beers, and 150 to 250 parts per million for dark roasted malt beers. So here's one where you're talking about a very wide range of concentration, and then also
And a dominant
several
player,
specific areas that you want to hit. So this seems to me one that you would want to hit very, very closely. If you're talking about making water adjustments, that seems like it would be one that you would want to look at very closely where you're going to land based on the type of beer that you're going to brew.
Well, and that's something we're going to discuss on the specific profiles, but it's your the bicarb ratio as well as the sulfate to chloride ratios. There's some ratios that are going to help determine what your water profile what your specific water profile contributes.
It's the second player. But with the sulfates, like Mikey just said, are the main players and what you're getting out of that beer every time.
And the thing you got to remember about bicarbonates too is that they're going to raise your pH pretty significantly. You have to be careful how you use them with that. If you're going to be making adjustments with that, you need to be cognizant of what your mash pH is. And it's something that in my recent brew I did not add this in because I'm already starting at a very high pH anyway. So I left it alone.
Okay.
Gotcha. So
All right. So do we do sulfate to chloride ratio? Do we not?
we haven't officially.
Now that would be that's
Is that
before
next?
our
That's-
profile.
That's the next thing
This
on the
is
list.
this is kind of the key, I think, to really what you're getting out of most of your brews, the sulfate to chloride ratio, SO4 to Cl ions. Basically, this is where you get into the balanced version of your profile, malty or bitter. I mean, these are what determine that the most out of all of the additions to water. Balance is nice. I mean, you get a lot out of that. I think if you have a balanced profile in the first place, you're going to be lucky because then you can usually get a lot of range out of that.
And I think that's probably what those blends are that you get from what is it? What's the water package you get?
AccuMash.
AccuMash.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's pretty much what
And
it
that's
is.
what they
is a
gear
blend.
those malty, bitter, and then they also base it on the SRM. That's one thing that we didn't kind of really jump into here, but you can gauge a lot of the SRM color by how acidic that's going to be. We mentioned that earlier. So
Yeah, and that's what the more dark malt you have, the more acidity you're going to add to your mash. For
much
sure.
higher
Yeah.
SRM versus a lower.
Yeah, like a lot of times and when you do that, if you get it too low, if you get your mash too low, you can extract, that dark tannins and kind of be harsh bitterness, you know,
Right.
from that grain.
Right.
So I think it's really important to really gauge your pH when you're doing stouts, and especially to me, I think one of the most important ones is maybe the dry stout, because
Right.
you can really overdo it in a heartbeat with a really astringent, bitterness. because I think there's not a whole lot of malt behind it anyway, because it's a small beer, so there's not much else there. So be really careful with that.
But yeah, the higher the sulfate, the higher the bitterness, and the drier the finish, which is something that you want to play up in English bitters, IPAs, pale ales, and the like. And that's why I think the English beers that are always so bitter are the way they are. That's kind of the water table there. The high chloride, on the other hand, higher maltiness. The base behind that, I guess, that's allowing that malt flavor to jump through. Too much of both can definitely lead to undesirable harsh flavors, which is kind of the general advice on that is don't think that by boosting both things that you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're not. It's going to turn out bad. In the long
it's like turning
run,
the treble and the bass all the way up on your stereo.
Exactly.
Yeah. I do that.
No mid-range.
Drop out the mid-range.
No mid-range whatsoever.
But you would add calcium chloride to modify your parts permitting for chloride, and gypsum typically, or calcium sulfate for modifying the sulfate side of things.
Do we want to talk about raising and lowering real quick?
Can
pH. Generally, I have several notes that I keep in various forms for this. Calcium chloride will raise your pH, and that's going to be calcium carbonate raises your pH. That's chalk. Calcium sulfate.
But don't go and get chalk off.
Right. Don't go. Don't go buy.
Grind up some Crayola chalk and then throw it in there.
Yeah.
It might work, but it's probably not. It's not as pure and that's what you're going to buy
reference
from.
in here.
But if in a pinch, it'll work. It'll also work for heartburn too.
Right. It also adds calcium.
Yum.
Any calcium carbonate, calcium chloride, obviously they're both adding calcium. The magnesium sulfate, you're adding sulfates. Calcium sulfate, you're adding sulfates. So you have to watch what you're adding because all of these are sold.
That's where it starts to get confusing for me. Because you're adding one thing, but it's adding two things.
Actually adds two.
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention.
And that's kind of one of the things that's nice about the lactic acid. You know that when you're adding that, you're just adding pH.
And there's sodium bicarb, which is baking soda, raises your pH without adding calcium.
But it adds salinity.
But adds the salinity because you've got the sodium in it.
And it raises your pH pretty dramatically, too. It doesn't take very much to raise it quite a bit.
Right. Epsom salt is the mag sulfate. Doesn't change the mash pH.
Magnesium sulfite.
Yeah.
It's Epsom salt.
Right.
Doesn't change your pH. Or, depending on who you talk to, will lower it very slightly. But it can help add some sulfate crispness to a hot bitter beer. So if you want a little bit of a crisp hot flavor.
Oh, I thought you said Christmas.
Christmas, yes.
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Merry Christmas. Yeah, we got a couple of comments here on Facebook. For one thing, Will was, as a follow-up to using the citric acid, he was saying that for his, he's using 0.4 grams per gallon for a total of 3.2 grams to get his pH down to 5.3. Personally, to me, that sounds expensive. 3.2 grams, I think you go through a little jar of citric acid fairly quickly. Compared to lactic acid, I think I paid $6 for a bottle of it that's pretty...
There's a 500 ml.
Quite a long time,
Yeah.
A half liter, I'm not sure what we charge, but it's under $10.
I think it's like $9.95, maybe.
So
and I'm using...
You'll last you a lifetime.
I'm using a tablespoon every time.
Right. That lasts a long time. So to follow up on that, the other thing Dwayne Hudson is asking, so do you add, you said 5.2 to 5.5 for pH. Is that for water profile or mash pH? That's mash pH, Dwayne.
Yeah.
And that's mash pH at mash temperatures. So if you pull off a sample and let it come to room temperature and then take a reading, 5.5 at room temperature is equal to 5.2 at mash temperatures. So that's important to know. I take my reading directly in the mash, but some people pull off a sample and let it come to room temperature, and there's going to be different readings for those, so you've got to know that. So he said his his water pH on his local water is 9.9.
Where are you at, Dwayne? Tell me where you're at.
Wow.
I think you can make batteries with that water, right?
I mean, all ours.
I think they bottle that up and sell it as that alkaline water or whatever,
Yeah.
that you buy, the health stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If you're brewing all grain, Dwayne, there's a very, very good chance you need to make mash pH adjustments. So that's something
Yeah,
I would spend the $35 or $40 to get a pH meter and take a look at that. And I think you'll note. For me, mine wasn't even that. Kansas City, Missouri, he says. So mine wasn't even that far out. My water pH is 8.2, and my mash pH at mash temperatures was about 5.5, 5.6. So really not that far out of range. And when I brought it into that 5.2 to 5.3 range, it made a drastic difference in my efficiency in my mash. I'm talking about almost 10%.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to do some research. There may be a reason why they're using the citric acid up there then, if their pH is that high. Makes me wonder. I don't know.
Who knows? Maybe it might just be a readily available thing or something like that. It might just be the guy that told him that has done it before and liked it and it worked well. And
See if I can find a water report.
same type of thing that we do,
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So I think this would be a great place to give us a quick break. What we're going to do when we come back is we're going to discuss what we went to. Was it Ward Labs?
Yeah, Ward Labs out of
We
Nebraska.
highly recommend those guys. They were really courteous. They were really quick, fast.
We'll give you some more information on them too when we come back.
And how to get in touch with them. Of course, make sure to tell them that Come and Brew It Radio sent you. And Patreon, yeah.
Patreon didn't send them there.
Oh, yeah.
We have a Patreon.
Yeah, remember to go to
Patreon.com.
It's patreon.com/Come and Brew It Radio and check out ways to support the show. We keep saying it, and I hope you keep hearing how expensive this is to do. And we really use your help. We appreciate everybody who's contributed so far. It really does make a big difference.
It sure does. Also, one of the things that we're doing this month is we're actually giving, instead of a T-shirt for the $10, we are actually getting embroidered shirts made. Did you ever have a chance to update that picture? Is it on Patreon?
Oh, I need to put it up.
They're badass.
Yeah, they're
by
going
the
to be
way.
awesome.
Yeah, they're really cool looking.
I know some of you guys have already joined up on the $10 thing. Just be patient. Everybody's going to get one. We're going to continue to run these for a little while. We've got some other cool swag coming in that's going to be really awesome. We're going to run a special on people that are joining up, and then we're going to give, of course, you guys that are part of that are donors. We're actually going to give you special pricing on a lot of some of the swag. So
Come and Brew It condoms.
Yeah,
They come in Magnum size only.
And they're glow in the dark for that strobe light effect.
Oh my goodness! So all right, man.
Wow.
We'll be back here in about 10-15 minutes, and we'll get started on this other stuff. Thanks,
Right
guys.
on.
Woohoo!
So 2015, their pH ranged from 8.6 to 10.3.
Wow, that's high. Yeah, he was saying here that his homebrew store does not sell lactic acid, so that's why they